I've always loved the quiet solitude of the open road at night. The hum of the engine, the cool breeze seeping through the cracked window, and the faint glow of the dashboard lights create a sense of calm that I can't find anywhere else. It's just me, the road, and my thoughts. But that night was different. I was somewhere between nowhere and nothing when I saw him. A lone figure standing on the side of the road, thumb out, face obscured by the shadows. Something about him made me hesitate, a primal instinct screaming at me to keep driving, but I didn't listen. I should have listened. I slowed the car and pulled over, rolling down the window just enough to speak. "Need a ride?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me through the window. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them boring into me, sizing me up. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded and walked around to the passenger side. He was tall, taller than I'd expected, and as he folded himself into the passenger seat, I noticed how gaunt he was. His clothes hung off him like they were made for someone twice his size, and his hands were pale and bony, fingers too long and thin. I forced a smile. "Where you headed?" "Just up the road," he replied, his voice low and gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in days. I nodded and put the car in gear, pulling back onto the highway. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with his presence. Every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong, but I couldn't place it. After a few miles, I couldn't take it anymore. I glanced over at him, trying to make out his features in the dim light. "You sure you're okay?" I asked, hoping to break the tension. He turned to look at me then, and for the first time, I saw his face. It was hollow, sunken, with dark circles under his eyes, and skin stretched tight over his skull. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. They were empty, no light, no life, just a void that seemed to swallow everything around it. A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt like I was trapped in the car with something inhuman. I wanted to stop, to kick him out, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, and my heart was pounding in my ears. I kept driving, hoping that if I just kept going, I'd wake up from this nightmare. But then, he started to laugh. It was a low, guttural sound that sent shivers through me. And as it grew louder, I realized it wasn't just a laugh. It was the sound of someone who had lost their mind, someone who had seen things no one should ever see. Suddenly, he stopped laughing and slumped back in his seat, as if all the energy had drained out of him. The silence returned, more oppressive than before, but now there was something else. Something cold seeping into the car. The temperature had dropped, and I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. "Pull over," he said, his voice barely audible. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed on the brakes and the car skidded to a halt. Without waiting for him to get out, I unlocked the doors and watched as he slowly opened his, stepping out into the night. But before he closed the door, he leaned in one last time. "You shouldn't have picked me up," he whispered, and then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness as if he had never been there at all. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat beside me, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing. I didn't know if I'd just had a close encounter with something supernatural, or if my mind had played tricks on me. But as I started the car and drove away, one thing was clear. I'd never pick up another hitchhiker again. That night, the road didn't feel so peaceful anymore. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating, and every shadow held a secret I didn't want to uncover. I kept driving, faster and faster, desperate to get away from whatever I'd let into my car, and praying that I wouldn't see those empty eyes staring back at me in the rearview mirror.